it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Mike Mahoney. Mike Mahoney is a professional wood turner that has been wood turning for years and years and years. I first met Mike at the Utah Symposium. He led the Utah Symposium for 7 years. He's been active with the AAW throughout his career. He's a world-class turner and demonstrator. Your pencils today because you're going to learn a lot. He's a really neat guy and he's got a lot to tell you.
Thanks for having me, folks. I take it I'm coming through okay. I had an unstable connection there for a second.
Yes, we're hearing you fine and seeing you also, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Well, all right, everybody, let me give you a quick demonstration on where I live. I live in rural Northern California, pretty rural, I would say. My closest neighbor is about 2.5 miles away. You would think California is, with 40 million people, would be fairly busy, but it's not. Most of the population, of course, is locked up in the cities. And other than that, most of California is very rural and agriculture. And I live right here in what's called gold country. And this is where gold was found in a lot of gold rush towns, Sutter Creek, Dry Creek, Jackson, Placerville, all on Highway 49, which is kind of a tourist destination now. But I'm going to share my screen here real quick, and let me give you this is how I run my demonstrations here. I give you what is called, I would call the director's cut. And that would be, let me move this bar here just to get us out of the way. That would be, I'm just going to show you videos of me turning and then talk about the process. I think there's a good way, I think it's a good way to learn. And anytime, I guess we're going to have questions, and anytime you have a question, please interrupt. I'm going to queue up this video here. This will show you where I live. And many of you know that where I live in Northern California, we have 2 seasons. We have a wet season and a dry season. Right now we're in the wet. We just had a storm last week that gave us about 10 inches in 2.5 days. So a lot of water pours out of the sky in a short time. And if everything holds up like last year, it never rained again. After that first big storm, we're hoping, crossing our fingers for a lot more rain. You're looking at my front yard there, looking down at my shop. I built that shop out of the cedar here that grows on the property. And those hills behind the barn there were all burned off about 6 years ago. The same week I finished that barn, and it was pucker up time. I wasn't even insured at the time, and that, of course, it's cedar, so it's kindling. So I stayed on the property and fought that fire, and every piece of grass you see around the house here also burned. We let it burn, ironically, just because Cal Fire thought it would be okay to let it burn. But all the trees below, you can see a few ponderosa pines down there, gray pines, those lived, but many of about 90 acres of my property here burned almost to a cinder. But I think if you came out today, you really wouldn't notice unless you were told. Let's run that video. And this is, those are valley oaks. Those are massive trees right in front of my house with some walnuts scattered out behind. That's a Zinfandel vineyard there. Most of us, we grow Zinfandel grapes. There's my house. I rebuilt that house from, you'll see what the picture of the house looks like. I think I've got that. That's what it looked like when I rebuilt it. We had a mountain lion living in the basement. That's a black walnut tree there. About a 5-foot diameter. There's a bathtub there. Obviously we have an outdoor bath, outdoor kitchen. This is my pistachio orchard. I planted from seed. I grow pistachios, olives, a little bit of everything here. We just harvested our pistachios and our olives last week. Just coming around here, that's the back of the home. And then now we're at my barn where I work. I work right here on the porch. That's the brown. I'll show you some other pictures of when it's green. It's green right now. And these are my machines here. I work right here on the porch. Vacuum lathe there on the left. That's my main production lathe there. That's a Bic mark, obviously. That's got a 4 horsepower motor. Very strong machine. Come on into my shop here. You'll see a lot of wine barrels. I'm a hobby winemaker. A lot of wood turning blanks, burial urn blanks for when I get commissions. Those are quarter-sawn white oak platter blanks that I sell to other wood turners. Pepper mill blanks. Let's push that ahead. They literally are white because I paint them with a white glue basically to keep them. That's where I'm talking to you from right now. There's my photo booth. I take pictures of my work, and then just a panorama of the shop, roughed out bowls. There's some sculptural work there on top of the table that most folks don't know that I do. These are just for collectors that I make. There's a burial urn for 2 people there. That's a redwood burl. That's a black oak burl there. A jumble of wood, nice pieces of wood that I can't throw away. There's my little Harvey lathe that I do small pepper mill work with. Wine barrels. That's my tool kit that I wheel out to the lathes. My respirator, a jumble of chainsaws that I don't use unless it's wintertime. And that's about it. I think I give you an interior shot of the barn. It's about 35 feet tall inside. So it's quite a building. That's a man cave out back there. All right, I'm just gonna stop share there. So that's where I live. Thanks for indulging me there. If anybody has any questions, we can stop there for a second. Otherwise, we'll get on to our program.
Any questions? No questions from our side.
Okay, very good. So Walt gave me that nice introduction. I'll give you a little bit more specifics of what my business is. I've been turning wood turning professionally for about 35 years. Right out of college, I got a teacher's credential, did my student teaching. All the while I was selling my work at craft shows on the weekends down in San Diego where I went to college. And I was doing financially pretty well at the time. Of course, I was single, didn't need to earn a lot of money, and I was always pretty savvy at selling my work. So I basically cut teaching off because I was doing better financially wood turning. Most folks have a problem making a living from wood turning, but I've always diversified. I've been a production turner, which is what I love, but I've always played the high end game as well. It's just, it's really, a lot of crafts people make a bad decision in going for the high end because once you're there, it's hard to come down, and it's a lot easier to sell 10 bowls at $100 than 1 bowl at $1,000. So I've always played both games, but the production work, guys like Richard Raffin and Ray Key are gentlemen I met early on in my career, and they said, do you want to make a living at wood turning or a good living? And I, of course, I wanted to make a good living. And they said, well, you're going to have to sell your work wholesale. And that's a tough pill to swallow because now you're selling your work for half of what it gets retail. But once you get your mind wrapped around it and you get productive and you're good at what you focus on, like for me, I did salables, was my main production line. And then of course, the burial urns came in a little bit later. And that's been a great business for me over the years. And then it shifted back about 2003, after 9/11 and a few other things. I was selling my high-end work at all the big craft shows in the country, and that would have been the Smithsonian, Washington Craft Show, Philadelphia Museum, and those were incredibly lucrative shows. And I was so lucky to be there at that time because today those shows are just a fraction of what they used to be financially, at least for the craftsperson. After 9/11, shows dropped about 2/3 in price as far as what you could make at those shows. And if you had to go back east to sell your work, you better be making some money because you don't want to break even or do any of those things because that's very detrimental to business. So, and anyway, so then it evolved into rough turning bowls and selling them to other wood turners. And that's where I am today. I'm good at sourcing timber. I buy a lot of Claro Walnut trees that grow here in orchards in Northern California. We'll talk a little bit about walnut since I basically grew up turning that wood, and there's 3 or 4 varieties here that are pretty special to me. So I buy those trees, buy the truckload, 40,000-pound loads. They drop. I buy 2 loads a year. They drop them off out back behind the barn here, and then I carve them up with the chainsaw, then the bandsaw, then I rough turn them. And basically, I've got about 7-8 minutes in each one of those pieces, and then I sell them by the board foot to other wood turners. So a by 4 bowl is 4 board feet, and that's about $52 in economics. So the wood is fairly inexpensive. I buy it by the pound. So a load would cost me about $2,500 delivered. So it barely is even economical for the people to load that onto a truck, because that wood will be burned in place if I didn't buy it. So a little economics there for me and them is better than it getting burned. So I know the orchard removal guys, they're friends of mine that I've just walked out on site and introduced myself and showed them what I did, gave them my card and said, hey, I'd like to buy a bunch of wood from you if you're inclined to do that. So that's what I do. And then we have these very large white oak trees all over Northern California. If you've ever been here, you've noticed that. Those are beautiful for making quarter-sawn white oak platters. And I use the trunks of the trees only. I don't use the branches. And I'll explain that when we watch the video here. So let me share my screen again. And this icon here will load up a video. I'll make it a little larger. There'll be a few adjustments here as I go. I'm going to think maybe I can ask for a show of hands, or just somebody might want to say something. But Arizona has quite a few oaks in it, four major oaks and maybe a half a dozen minor oaks. Can anybody name some of those for me?
Here's your challenge, guys. Anybody know the names of these oaks? Mountain oak?
What was it?
Mountain oak?
That's probably a gamble oak if it's up in the hills, maybe.
Yes, Gamble oak I know is in this area.
Gamble oak. You've got silverleaf, emery, shrub live oak. Anybody? Well, this is probably good that you folks don't know the name of these because you're not using them, and there could be all kinds of reasons for not using oak. But if what we just mentioned there are the common names of oaks, and there's probably 450 species of oaks in the world. North America and Mexico probably have the most. Here where I live, I've got 7 or 8 species of oak, and like I said, the Prescott area has 4 major oaks. Whatever those common names are, they fall under 2 categories. And so if you were in discussion with a neighbor and you said, hey, look at that red oak over there, and he might refer to it as an emery oak, but you were right by calling it a red oak. Because with all these common names of oaks, they're either whites or they're reds. And why would that be important for wood turners or woodworkers in general? And the reason is humans have had a long history with the oak tree for tools and shelter and boat construction. You saw the wine barrels in here. Those are all white oaks. And of course, when humans used oak, they early on figured out which oaks were best for the purpose they were using them for. Generally, red oak was not used for much of anything except for some internal framing, because it transpires moisture and it is easily rotted. Whereas the white oak doesn't. You can sink a board of white oak in the dirt in a wet area and it doesn't degrade. And that's why we built ships out of it. And our wine barrels, of course, are all in this case, wine barrels are quarter-sawn white oak. And we'll talk about that when we go. But how to identify red and white oaks? It's really simple. The white oaks are always soft lobed, and the red oaks are going to have points on them. So let me show you what a red oak leaf looks like here. And I'm sorry if you're not interested in oaks, but I hope you will be from here on out, because they're pretty special, and it's beautiful wood as well. So that's a red oak leaf. It's got points, and there's so many varieties of leaves for oak trees. And for anybody who might be inclined to identify your oaks out where you live, keep in mind that oak trees interbreed, and well, let's just say they're promiscuous, and white oaks will breed with other white oaks. So I'm looking at my list here. Arizona has more red oaks than it does whites, but they live together. They grow together for evolutionary reasons. But red oaks will make other red oaks. So if you had 3 or 4 varieties of red oaks, they'll breed with others, and their leaves will take on a semblance of their parents, but they're not going to be their parents. Very similar to humans, of course. They're hybrids. So that's what we're talking about here. And I've always thought it should be a lot easier to identify reds and whites, but it's not. You're looking at the end grain of a white oak tree. It's about 3 foot in diameter, this particular one. Notice, I'll drop out the term medullary ray, and all trees have medullary rays, but oak is very prominent with medullary rays. So if you look at that black line emanating out of the center, that's a medullary ray. There's one coming out this way here. There's one coming out that way. It's a little twisted, and then the medullary ray kind of gets twisted right there because the tree's not growing on particularly level ground, possibly, or the wind may have twisted the trunk a bit. But that medullary ray could be used very nicely in our work if we know how to work with it. So a true quarter-sawn log, when we say quarter-sawn, it's basically cutting. Then right here, I'm going to draw a platter blank. So I'm going to take a platter blank here. I'm going to take a platter blank here. I'll take a platter blank here. And I'll take a platter blank here. Well, those are true quarters because I've cut with the medullary ray. So there's 4 true quarters here, and there could be more, but the boards get smaller. There's another, if I was going, there's another. And so when you cut like this, you're going to pay a premium because there's a little more waste, or a lot more waste. But the wood, if you look at the side of the board, you'll get this flecking pattern, and that flecking pattern is your saw, in this case, cutting with the medullary ray and causing a beautiful look. Because, and if you ask me, oak is not the prettiest wood in the world, but when you cut it on the quarter, it rivals the prettiest of the woods. And guess what? It's local. But notice one thing about the boards that we're cutting here. The annual rings are going through the board in straight lines almost, depending on the diameter of the tree. These could be nearly straight. This is a 3-foot diameter, and you can't really see the annual rings there, but they're still fairly straight. And what that means, if we're going to make a platter, a tray or a plate, something for the house, and you want to use it, you probably want to cut the boards out of the log, just like I drew them here. And otherwise, you're going to get an object that's going to cup or warp. So let's think about that. I'll clear this off. So if you took a platter blank here, maybe you wanted a bigger piece or something. The problem is your annual rings are going through in long arcs, and this will cup. This will actually cup in this direction here. You'll get a board that looks like this over time. So if you made a platter for the family, again, this is not the optimum cut out of the log because of the ring placement in the board. So something to think about, and this is something I think about a lot because I make objects for utility. I want people to use my work. I think if you looked on my website, and I don't know what the actual verbiage is, but I say something like, being a craftsman is great and doing all this is fun and this blah, blah, blah. But what fulfills me more as a craftsperson is somebody will buy something from me or get a gift from me and they will use it. So if I made a salad bowl for you out of this beautiful piece of English walnut, and I say, use it, I mean it. I want you to put spaghetti in it. I want you to put salads in it. I want it to get dinged up. I want it to show wrinkles because that really, if you can see a 30, 40, 100-year-old bowl or tray, they're beautiful if you think that way. And not everybody thinks that way, I know. Just in my lifestyle, I almost never want to own anything somebody would steal. And that's just the kind of the way I've always lived. I'm not up for fancy things or whatever. I bought a new car a couple of years ago, and I think I've washed it 3 times. And that most of the times was from a rainstorm. So maybe you can get where I'm coming from. So I really am conscious about how I make my work and why I'm making it. And then, of course, what I finish it with will be very important as to the longevity of what I make. We'll talk more about that. Any questions out there before we proceed?
Anyone
Okay.
have any questions?
I'm going to wake somebody up here. No worry. Let's just keep on going. You're going to watch me here. I'm going to turn off the volume. It's you can hear my buzzing of the chainsaw. I don't know why my volume button won't go down. But here I'm out cutting a 9-foot diameter valley oak. This guy was, I think, 480 years old, about 10 miles from my home. And I'm out here, I'm quarter sawing. I'm pointing at the medullary ray right there. And I'm going to run my saw right through that medullary ray. And the bigger the tree, the better, because the arcs of the annual rings will be more like straight lines. You can see how thick that bark is. It's like cutting dirt. It's and that grass that you see there, that's stuck on the bark. And then I'm going to take you back to my shop, point at the medullary ray again, just to get you to think about it. Drawing on it, I'm overkill here, but I'm going to run my saw through that, and let's look at the flecking. Some people call this tiger oak. It's just how we cut it out of the log. So let's look at that. There's the flecking. That's the medullary ray cut on the side. And like I said, oak, every tree has a medullary ray, and you can buy quarter-sawn cherry, walnut, whatever. Just the oak and the hickories and the pecans, and there's a few other varieties that are very strong with medullary ray. If you could see a medullary ray, it's a strong medullary ray. typically you can see it in cherry and walnut too, if you know what you're looking at. This is me roughing out a bunch of platter blanks. Now we'll go through the process, and this is on a screw center. So, and the reason I made this video is not for this purpose to talk to you folks about it. I make this again for the wood turners who buy these platter blanks from me, and I want them to know how the process works. So you can go on my website or YouTube and watch this video for free. And you might ask, why would I rough turn it in anyway? Why don't I just wax it in its blank form? The reason is cracking. You're more apt to crack an object if you haven't rough turned it properly. And I'll explain a little bit more about that as we go. This is a 5/8 inch bowl gouge. I'm going to get it round. You can see the water pouring out of the wood. So there's a lot of free water to escape yet. So, and oak is such an easy wood to dry when it's quarter sawn as compared to when it's not. And the reason is the heartwood is very dry and the sapwood is very wet. So you have competing shrinkage problems there. And that's why you usually don't see a lot of oak bowls, because that means the sap and the heartwood are intermixed, and you'll tend to get a lot more cracks that way. And we're talking about cracks because I don't make work with cracks in it, and I don't glue them or anything. If it cracks while I work with it or while it dries, it creates heat for the house, because if you're gluing cracks in your work and it's not artwork, you glue and wood do not mix over time. So those joints are just going to open up and become a dustbin item. So this is the back side of the platter. I'm going at real time right now. I will speed us up here from time to time. Just flattening off the base, thinking that this object is going to be a finished platter. The bases on platters are minimum 50% of the total diameter. So if this is a 16-inch block of wood, I want the base to be 8 inches, but I'm going to make the base bigger than that for the drying process, and I can pare down the base when it's dry. And typically platters have a simple OG curve or cove or bead on the bottom, and then I'm playing into that right now. Watch what my gouge does right here. It's going to soften up the edge of the platter. And I want to explain that because there it is, boom, and boom. Basically, let's stop there. The reason I'm doing that, and also one thing to notice here, you'll see a sharp edge there, and we did have a sharp edge there. I want to get rid of them for the drying process. I do that with my bowls as well. I don't leave sharp edges on the bowls or the platters here. I soften them up because sharp edges tend to dry quicker in those areas on those sharp edges. So they're tension surfaces, and if you're going to get cracks, they usually come from those sharp edges. So I'm going to soften this guy here and soften that, and it'll go through the drying process like that. Again, I'll draw a bowl here, but a bowl would be rough turned with the rim of it being softened as well, and then dried. I don't leave them sharp. So there you go. That's just a tip. Hope you can use that. And now I'm just going to hollow out the interior of the platter. Let's speed this up here. Just put a little dish in this area, and then take it off the lathe. Let's go a little faster, then you'll get to see how pretty this wood is. So there you go. Look at the beautiful pattern on the top of that platter there. And that was just by the way we cut it out of the log. Now I'm going to put a PVA wood sealer on it, polyvinyl acetate, which is white glue. And I use that for all the drying green pieces of wood to store. So here here I am. I've added up maybe 10% water to the Elmer's glue. We'll call it Elmer's glue, and then they'll go to the drying storage like this. No questions, anybody?
Mike, I have a question. Why do you
Please.
choose the PVA instead of a wax-based?
Polyvinyl, well, white glue is superior, and I've run tests on it now. So everybody, think about how wood dries. There's free waters, other moisture content in wood when it's freshly cut. So wood. I'm trying to think of an analogy, but think about, so a tree falls down in the neighbor's house. You come over the same day, help them cut it up. You take the logs and then put them in plastic, do whatever you're going to do to process them. And you make a bowl out of that piece of wood in the next few days. That wood is very elastic and young and strong and vital. If you let that wood sit in plastic for a month or two, it develops a type of rigor mortis, and that's the only term I can think of, but the wood kind of seasons. Same thing happens when a tree falls down and lays in the ground for a while. The wood is not the same as it was when it fell, considering that the tree was healthy when it fell. So by letting the wood sit over time, you're a lot more successful through the drying process because a lot of the free waters are gone. And the best tree you can ever get is one that's dead standing and the bark is held on and it dies and sits there for a year or two. That's excellent wood to work with because you don't have to go through the pains of the drying process with an item like that. So as wood dries, it evaporates, of course. And when it's evaporating slowly, the wood cells dehydrate and become stiff, and that forms a structure so they don't collapse. But when wood dries quickly, the wood cells haven't had time to dehydrate and they collapse, and there's your crack. That's your check or your I call it honeycombing. But that's kind of the way you got to think about and think about how variable all these timbers are, from mesquite to oak to walnut, whatever. They're all different and they all dry differently. And some dry easily, some don't dry easily. It is determinant on how you cut it out of the tree, how much sapwood is involved in your work, all these things. There's just so much. But the polyvinyl acetate, the white glue, stiffens the surface of the wood, and it lets the moisture out slowly. The wax ones are fine too. I've worked for 30 years with the wax water-based sealers. However, I have noticed a marked difference in the quality of the drying process with white glue over any other substance I've used. So I think, Ken, you asked that?
Yes, thank you for that.
Yeah, and it's fairly inexpensive too. Of course, Craft Supplies sells this under the name Tree Saver. And you folks living in Arizona, especially at higher elevations, you're in a very dry climate, so you're fighting to keep the moisture in the wood as long as you can. Whereas living where I do, I'm fighting to pull it out because we're so moist relative. Even though we can get very hot in the summer, it's still a very moist heat, and it's so something to think about. And your drying process will be different than mine, just because of where we live. So, any other questions? Any questions?
Anybody have any other questions? Yes, just a minute, Mike. Let me get the microphone to it. Who said that?
I got one. Hey, Mike, do you buy this stuff by the truckload, or it looks like you need an awful lot of it?
You know, I buy maybe 10 gallons of it a year, and plus I water it down every time I use it, because if you leave it full strength, it's very hard to spread. And it's you know, if you did 100 of these in a day, and then you've got to paint them yourself. It's pretty tough on your arms. So yeah, I thin it with water, and that seems to do the trick. But you can buy this on Amazon as well, or eBay. People sell this in 55-gallon drums, and it's about probably $7 to $10 a gallon, and it's readily available. That was the question, eh?
Any other questions?
That's it for now.
now, Mike.
Thanks, you guys. Why am I stopped there? Okay, so I'm going to speed us up here. Now we're going to go through the drying process, which you don't really see here, but you can kind of see bowls in the background stacked. They're just going to be kept in a cool, dark place. And I do all my rough turning in the winter because it's so warm here in the summer. The rate of cracking would be high, and not only that, it's no fun to run a chainsaw when it's 80, 90 degrees. So I go to the coolest months, do all the processing, because I don't have to really worry about the wood sitting out and splitting while I'm doing all this. But every day they will be protected, because the process would be weeks and months doing all this. So you can't just leave the wood out. It has to be put in plastic bags and watered down if you're going to let it sit out for a while. So here, notice my chuck is closed. It's closed completely, and I'm going to take a measurement of the outside diameter of that chuck, because that's going to be my method of holding it to the lathe. So I'm going to cut a recess in the bottom of this platter, which I'm never a big fan of. We do it like this because most folks don't have chucks that will grip 8, 9, 10-inch diameter tenons. So we recess them. And as long as we know how to carve our recesses well, we can make them look like details and not chucking devices. So I'll take that measurement so I can cut just the exact size recess, not one bigger, not one smaller, because it won't fit. But if you cut it bigger, you'll mar the surface and you'll have to dress it up later. So I don't want to come back to that surface. So I give you the option of chucking up this dry blank in the chuck where the kind of tenon surface was, or you can put it back on the screw. Again, think about why this video was made, for people who want to use one of my blanks to make a platter themselves. So literally this wood dried in 90 days. It's a quick dryer. So I'm back on the lathe 90 days away. Tailstock is always on when you have a screw center. So I still have my volume off. I'm going to keep it off so I can talk over it. I'm going to get it round first. I'm going to pick up the speed of the video so we can get on to other subjects today. Now I'm going to true up the backside. This is with a shearing cut, a shear scrape. I am I advocate for this cut. You notice that's the backside of the end grain. So it's not very abrasive to my tool. My tool doesn't see any end grain if I could help it. And this is a dry piece of wood, so I'm just kind of shearing at the wood there. And that's a sharp edge next to the wood. So there's no bevel run here. I'm just kind of peeling the wood. And as long as I'm not touching end grain, that suffices. And this is a very practical way to turn. If I was taking, say, my colleague Stuart Batty's technique and doing that, it may be the proper way to do the way he does it, but it would take a lot longer and it would take a lot more skill. So here I'm just truing up the backside. You can look at that beautiful flecking. That's a straight edge. I'm just making sure that's flat. And now there's my chucking device. Now I'm going to cut a less than 1/8 of an inch recess in there. Notice this is a spindle fingernail gouge. And we're going to talk about that because I'm going directly into end grain fiber. So I have to worry about running the bevel now to do a good job. And there's my recess that has a slight dovetail to it. Now watch what happens. I'm using a different gouge now. This is a bottom feeder or a traditional gouge. Look at the pigtail that comes off the cut. It's a beautiful, clean cut. And the reason I switched gouges there from a fingernail to a traditional bottom feeder type gouge is because when you have to cut directly into end grain, this design works better than a fingernail. It lays the wood down nice and clean. You can tell just by the ribbon of the cut, whereas the fingernail was creating more powder. And I hope that spurs some questions. But if it doesn't, we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we watch another quick video. Back to the fingernail gouge. And the reason we don't use that traditional gouge or that bottom feeder for everything is because it doesn't get into tight details like the dovetailed surface there. Now this is the base. I'm carving out the base, flattening it basically. Now this is a 16-inch diameter and I want an 8-inch base. I want 50% of it to be base. Why 50? If it gets smaller than 50, it becomes less usable. The item can become tippy. If it gets larger, it's harder to put a nice shape on the outside. And that's okay because this is going to sit on a table and most folks are never going to view the profile of this piece because they're going to be standing above it. But still, it's nice to do a good design if you're always so inclined. So there's our base. And I'm going to mark that base in a sense. I make it look like a raised detail. I want the eye to see it. So this is now a OG curve. This is a bead going into a cove, which is just about all wood turning in a nutshell. And then I'll show you the profile here, and then I'll draw it so we kind of know where we're going. There's the profile. So very simple traditional style, cove, bead, then we have our raised base, and then we have a recess. I'm going to overdraw it, and then that recess kind of bows out like this. And the reason it bows out, but it doesn't hit the table, you don't want that area to hit the table, our interior is going to come in, and right where you need the most thickness, you don't get it because we have a recess. So all the more wood you can put down there, the better, because you don't want to tick that and it sound thin. So I kind of bow that surface out. This is just a concept because for the recess. Any questions on that?
Any questions here?
Yeah. So the base diameter is a well thought out plan. Again, I want this to be used. So I think about that. You know, the best platter makers in the world came from Northern England, and that would have been Ray Key, Alan Batty, even modern day, who's our friend from Las Vegas? Jimmy Clues. Great platter makers, and it's in their blood. You know, Alan Batty was a third generation wood turner. His father was killed in a wood turning accident. But these folks grew up with wood turning, and it's in their blood, and they all learned how to make platters because they were sold all around the world. But the interesting thing about how they made beautiful platters, they'd always make these really small bases. They'd come down in their tiny little bases here, and I used to kid them all the time, and I go, "Oh, you're making a wall hanging. You're not making a real platter because it just tipped over all the time." But then I remembered they lived in England, so they didn't mind if the food fell off the tray. Now I got a laugh out of you guys. That's good. Okay, let's proceed. And now I'm just going to clean up all the edges. You don't want anything torn or frayed here. So I'm just going to put a sharp edge on those, not so sharp that they'll cut you. And if they are that sharp, I'm going to soften them up with a little bit of abrasive. Now, nobody wants to see me sand here, but there is strategy here. I typically don't power sand these, but I know most folks are going to power sand them. So This is a very simple process. I started with 120. Now I'm just going to stop. So in case you don't know, the rotation of the lathe is coming down here onto it. And I'm using this half of the disc and it's moving up. Okay, so I'm counteracting the rotation. And if the way you know that this is correct is if you hear your drill over accelerating, you're probably in the wrong direction. So just something to throw out there. So I'm going to go through 120, and then watch what happens. I'm going to reverse the lathe and go to 180. And I'm also hand sanding the tight details where the power sander doesn't get, right in those edges, with the same grit that I was just using. Now I reverse the lathe and do it again. I get a better sanded surface by going in both directions. Now, I'm gone through all the grits, 320, 400. This is 400 here. And that's generally my finest grit for just about everything I make. Because again, if you polish these things up too well, they're not going to be used. People will look at them. And now notice, they won't use them because they're shiny. Notice there is a little bit of shine on this piece, and that's happened because of what I'm doing now. I cleaned off the surface with air compression, and I'm taking an old 400 grit, not a new one, and I'm crushing that, burning it right into the surface and in both directions. And this is the burnishing process. I know some folks who burnish with paper or wood chips or those things. I don't like to grab wood chips off the floor to burnish because you'll pick up a stray rare grit of something else and put a scratch in your work. So notice the only shine that's on this piece, you can see a little bit of glimmer on that wood, and that's from the sanding process, of course. And the finish I put on here will not create a shine. So the only shine it gets is through the sanding process. And I don't want a shine on my work, and I'll explain that when we get to the end. Now I recessed, let me go back there. I want you to just notice that. There's the finished platter. Now watch how little the chuck opens. So I cleaned out that interior there. I'm gonna open it up. It barely travels, just a slight little bit. And now that surface will stay clean without having marred that surface. So that everything on the back side is completely done now. Except for the finish.
Mike, can we interrupt you for a question
Of course.
from the audience?
Yeah.
Can you?
My question is approximately what RPM are you turning that when you're sanding it?
Yeah, great question. I don't have a readout on my lathe, so I never know, but I know I do not want it to be spinning at the speed I cut it with, because as I sand, the two things, or the three things that kill sandpaper and are itself when it breaks off, and heat is a major culprit. So you want to keep the heat down and you want to keep it clean. So you want to keep that surface clean. So I slow up the RPMs probably half of the turning speed that I cut it with. So if I'm turning at, say, maybe 1,000 RPMs, I'm probably sanding at 500. So just be cognizant of the heat buildup of the paper. And so did that answer the question?
Yes, it did. And it's about the same thing when you're burnishing it. Can you still burnish it at that speed?
No, you probably will rev it up to build up some heat for the burnishing process.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I almost burned my fingers with the sandpaper. And you didn't notice this, but if I back up here, let's watch me. I don't even know if I did it. Let's see. There it is. That piece of paper right there is folded into not on itself. It's folded in thirds. So let's see if I show myself folding it, because I'm always folding my paper into three parts. So you don't see it, but I fold it in on itself. You don't want it to rub on itself either, because like I said, sandpaper destroys itself. And I talk about this subject like it's important, because it is. It's the most expensive tool I have in my shop. So I take good care of it because it degrades so quickly. And So I'm very thoughtful about how I use it. And you know, paper is expensive, and the quality of the paper generally you know by the price, and that there are exceptions to that rule. Abernet is a relatively decent quality paper. I don't think it's worth the price that you pay for it, and it really only has one good purpose, and that's to sand greenwood. The papers I use are ceramic typically in base, the 3M ceramic, and I use a Japanese paper for the finer grits, like that 400 you were seeing there. So yeah,
Thank you very much.
more than you wanted to know, I'm sure.
Thank you, Mike. We got a couple more questions.
Please.
I have one. I understand sanding, but I personally don't understand why you burnish. Would you please explain what burnishing does to the surface?
It is in this scenario with the white oak. It's kind of it's when the paper was finished, it had a cut look. It was dull, and so instead of grabbing, some people burnish with paper towels or even newspaper. What that does is you're superheating the surface, and it's polishing it. That's all it's doing. It's polishing the surface, and it's taking that cut look and making it shiny. Did that answer the question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. There's one more question from the floor here.
Right.
Oh, you just answered it, I guess.
So again, I don't.
Oh, another question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Mike, do you have any issues with the finish or oil being absorbed when you burnish it?
Oil being absorbed. Where's the oil?
Well, are you using just no finish at all? You're just burnishing.
Yeah, I'm burnishing with no finish. Yeah, no, that's definitely what I'm doing there. This was a raw piece of wood, and I probably wouldn't burnish the finish in. You certainly could, but I do all my finishes off the lathe, not on the lathe. I treat these like pieces of furniture. If you're doing your finishes on the lathe, you're throwing around a lot of finish in the air, and you're probably wasting it, and it's very superficial. You're not getting the attention it needs to soak in or do whatever. Yeah, thank you.
I'm not thinking as much as putting the finish on as the effect of the burnishing, the ability to absorb.
Yeah, so if you burnish, let's say you put, in this instance, I'm going to put my finish on here. It's a walnut oil based finish, and if you superheat that surface with the oil on it, you'll get better penetration for sure, because you're making the oil more viscous, and so it's going to travel. So I see your point there. Thank you. I don't do it again just because I do my finishes off the lathe. Thank you. I get it.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. So we're going to do the interior of the platter now, and it's fairly simple. You can just see me scraping off the untrue wood there, and I'm going to develop the rim just to invite the eye to look in, because that's a big expanse of wood, 16 inches there without any intrig in between. So you put typically a design with a rim. That's a very traditional concept. You can make variations of this all the time. You could do much larger rims, much smaller rims, all these things. And what I'm doing here is taking off those sharp edges so they don't slice me. Most of you folks know what the feeling of a piece of spinning object slices a finger. It's not a nice feeling. So I get rid of that issue right there. Now I'm back at the rim. Again, scraping it off. And none of my work has flat spots in it. So this rim is kind of beaded. So it's kind of got a bead on it. Not a very good drawing there, sorry. It's not flat. There you can see the medullary ray there, beautiful. And I'm showing you that I'm going to go about 1 3/4 inches for the rim. And this is a 16-inch piece. So that would be roughly 10% of the total diameter as a rim design. And I'm very cognizant of how clean those details are. Now I'm going to cut the interior of the platter here, and watch this big tool leaves an evenly spaced line on that interior curve. And that's because this is a bulk removal tool and it has a very large bevel on it. Look how it kind of just rubs the bevel right onto that interior curve. And this is an argument for making a short beveled tool so you can get rid of that marking that the bevel's leaving on the interior. So anytime you do interior curves, shorten the bevel of your tool so it doesn't rub a mark like that on the interior of the rim. Anybody have a question on that? Because when I go to the finish cut, I'm going to go with a much smaller gouge with a very short bevel.
Any questions? We're good here, Mike.
Yep, and I'm careful not to remove too much of that inner piece there because it'll make the surface wobbly if I take out too much wood. So I kind of do this in steps. So now I'm going to cut the interior curve here. And I think there'll be a point here where I should just stop the video and explain what I'm setting up to do, because this happens to everybody. Let's stop right there. So what you can't tell from this image is where the gouge is in its horizontal fashion. This tool is held horizontally. So the handle is basically in my belt surface. So it looks like it's cocked down a little bit, like you might think it should be, but it should be held horizontally. And the reason for that is there's a detail here, of course, and it's raised. So how many of you folks know the feeling that when you make this cut and you don't do it right and the gouge skates right off to the left there and ruins the rim of your plate or your bowl or whatever? And that the reason that is because you hadn't held the tool horizontally. If you looked at the front of this tool, let me just draw the front of the tool, and I'm not drawing it the same way that I'm holding it, but a gouge is typically has a front that looks like that. If you don't touch the point of the tool to the spinning object, it's going to shoot you off to the left. And so that's why I hold it horizontally. So that might be a good lesson as well. If you have that issue, why that was caused is because the spinning object hit lower than the point, because you probably entered with the handle down, and so it was going to hit below the point. It was going to hit not off the top, and therefore it skates, and it skates hard to the left. So hopefully that helps you understand that technical issue, because it happens to everybody, and it happens every time your gouge touches an object. If it doesn't touch point first, it skates a bit. And we'll talk a little bit more of that when we go to talk a little bit about tool design and grinding right after this video, I think. So much smaller gouge here, 3/8 inch bowl gouge. The bevel is less than 1/8 of an inch, and it leaves behind a nice interior curve because it can. And also notice my flute is fairly open right there, and that's because I'm coming into the end grain fiber, and I started it up at about 230 and I ended up at 1. Hopefully that you're understanding that. So I feel that that's a good sandable surface. Now I can proceed to scrape off the rest of the platter and then sand it and then put a finish on it. So notice what I'm doing here. I'm cutting always towards the spindle. How come I didn't draw it? So I'm cutting in that direction. So everything's like that. And I'm not cutting towards the spindle. That's because that's where the end grain fiber is. And I'd rather not. I'd always rather cut with the grain. So I don't build up heat. I don't build up stress on the tenon, all that. So I'm going to kind of just scrape that off. And I actually There's a little segment of this video missing where I took off the nub here, but that's pretty simple stuff. And now I'm going to take a round nose scraper to give myself a nice interior. I know you folks waltz in there, you know that this is probably not the way I do it. I cut it in with a traditional gouge, but I realize most folks don't have that skill and they should be going to this tool. And probably even a negative rake scraper would work in this scenario because the wood's dense enough. But if you don't do a nice interior curve here, light will reflect and will show a poorer piece. So always be thoughtful about how well the turning is going to look in the future. And of course, this is a skill related issue, but it's nice when your work looks good and it'll last longer. Notice I'm sanding with the lathe off right there at the dead center. When the lathe is on, I avoid the dead center. I just kiss it and move on. And that is because when it's spinning, you're hitting the same surface over and over way too much. And so I hit any kind of rough spot there with the lathe off, and then I'll spin it and then power sand the rest. So watch what happens. I get towards the center and move right away. I could stay right here forever and not change the shape. But right here, kiss it and move. Kiss it and move, especially with the coarse grits. Okay, let's fast forward through this. We've already talked about that this process. Hand sanding, and now this looks like an advertisement for my finish, and it isn't, and it is in a sense just because the name on the bottle has my name on it, but I didn't want it to be. And this is a discussion about why I think about finishing anything, and this particular topic can go on for hours and be very technical, but since this piece is getting a penetrating oil on it, that means I'm facilitating its use. Let's just say I wanted to use polyurethane, and that's going to give me a much marketable finish because it's going to shine up the work. The general public will appreciate it more. The general public, I mentioned, not the woodworker. The woodworker is going to appreciate the grain without the shine, typically. But penetrating oils like this, anybody's grandkids and grandparents can apply it. It takes no skill. However, the varnish, the polyurethanes, not so much. Those finishes take skill. So that's the end of that video. And we can talk more about that, or I can go back to it if we want to. Any questions out there?
Mike, I have a question regarding what you just said. Using the walnut oil, do you ever give or sell a small bottle of the oil to people who buy those so they can refinish it in the future?
Oh, most certainly. Every bowl that I make gets a bottle of walnut oil to go with it. So in the future, they can recondition the finish. Yeah, and it doesn't need to be done, but generally the folks who buy the work wherever they see it, for instance, just going back to this bowl, this particular bowl, if I put a shine on it with a polyurethane or lacquer or whatever, shellac, whatever you choose, and they use it, let's just say they throw 4 or 5 apples in there and it's sitting on the counter and one of them goes bad and then there's a mark on the wood. And then they're going to clean that mark and the finish is kind of broken down right where that mark was. They're going to be disenchanted with that particular piece because they'll maybe come back to you to say, can you put a different finish or refinish this or whatever. With the penetrating oil, mineral oil, all the vegetable oils, whatever you use for a finish, everyone can redo that finish and make it look new. Again, the film finishes take a lot more skill. And most folks, if they break that film finish down, they'll probably put the piece of bowl in the cabinet and sell it at a garage sale 10 years later when they move. so you can get the idea of how the finish could really play with the longevity of the work. So therefore I choose a penetrating oil because it looks today, when they take it home, the same it'll look in 10 years. There may be some cut marks or some olive stains or thing like that, but that becomes a patina. That's wrinkles on a face. We're just not going to get away from that. And if we're lucky enough to grow old enough to get wrinkles, I appreciate that more so now than ever.
Thank you. Any questions? Got one here.
What is the thickness that you leave your bowl, the finished product, the rim and the base of the bowl itself?
Yeah, thank you. I don't ever measure, but I bet you they're never thicker than 3/8 of an inch and never thinner than a quarter. Great question. And but you know, this bowl, let's go back to this bowl again. You can see the rim here is about an inch thick, but right behind the rim, it's about a heavy 1/4 inch because I've cut that back. Again, I don't measure it. And then the bottom would probably be here a little thicker than the sides. That's just for gravity and the way it feels. So yeah, and so try to always, and this is so easy to say, but so hard to achieve, make it so when you pick something up, it isn't too heavy or too light, because if it's too light, people tend to not use them or put them down because they think it's fragile. Just noticing that over the years of me watching people pick up my work at shows and things.
We've got another question, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever use boiled linseed oil for
I use
penetrating oil?
I use boiled linseed oil a lot for finishes. I've got some pieces right here that I've used boiled linseed oil on, but it's been blended with a different products. So this is a pepper mill. I haven't put the mechanism in it yet, but this is a hollow form. So these are hollow. So there's quite a bit of turning to these, and they're quite larger than most pepper mills that you'd see, but they're still very grippable because the openings are right here where you pour the peppercorns in is fairly small diameter. Then the head kind of hopefully fits the base. But this is a blend of let's say 1/3 polyurethane, 1/3 boiled linseed oil, and then 1/3 mineral spirits. And that's the finish that this particular item gets. And it gets probably 2 to 3 coats of that. And I scrub the surface every time I put a finish on, another coat. And then on the last coat, I probably, so I brush it on and then I wipe it right off while it's wet. That's how I finish it. I don't wipe it on and let it sit because I want to build up the finish slowly so it doesn't look glassy or plasticky. That's how I do it. Whereas, let me go to this particular item. This is a burial urn for a cat. Notice that very high shine finish. This is lacquer, and it was shinier when I finished it, but I scrubbed it off with 4/0 steel wool to kind of take that shine off. So this is a very high film based piece, but it deserves it because this item is going to sit in a cabinet or on a shelf somewhere and just be dusted. So that's why I use lacquer in this instance, but I would never use lacquer on this because lacquer is not nearly as durable as the boiled linseed oil mixture that I just mentioned. And so much more to talk about on that, but that you get the idea, I hope.
Any other questions? No questions right now.
Yeah, so the one more process in that platter, and since it's oak, this is what white oak looks like when it's finished without, this has, I think, 1 or 2 coats of the boiled linseed oil finished mixture that I just told you. Look at the color of that, and you could, the medullary rays are there, but they're not really pronounced. You're going to see them. But to enhance this white oak's appearance, look what I've done to it. This is the exact same wood, side by side, This has been put in an ammonia chamber. The Stickley brothers used to do all their mission furniture with this process. Once they finished the pieces, they would build a cabinet. In this case, for me, I take a 55-gallon drum, put a yogurt cup full of ammonia in the bottom, and then I put the pieces in the trash can with a lid on them. And I went from this to this, and this makes the medullary rays pop out. And that's why I do it. And if 10 of us were in a room and I said, which one do you like better? 9 are going to say the darker one. So that's why I do it. It makes for a more marketable look, and it makes the figure really jump out of the piece. And then I put a finish on it afterwards, the boiled linseed oil mixture that we talked about. And if anybody wants that mixture again, 1/3 gloss polyurethane, 1/3 boiled linseed oil, and 1/3 mineral spirits. And that's the best Danish oil or varnish you'll ever be able to buy, one that you make. Because most of the folks who sell those products to you, Formby's, Watco, Minwax, those generally are much thinner bases than the ones you can make. So you can play with those numbers to make them thicker based. The thicker bases are your boiled linseed oil and your polyurethane. Or if you want to thin it down, just add more odorless mineral spirits. Now, if you're going to use those finishes, you've got to know they're very hard to dry. Like all the natural oils, like my walnut oil, they dry very slowly in the winter months because of the temperature. So when you use those finishes in the mixture that I just explained, I would add a Japan dryer, which is a chemical, a metallic dryer that's added to that finish to help it cross-link and dry. And you can buy Japan dryer at any paint store, even at Home Depot, they sell Japan dryer. And you would add that per the directions on the can. And it'll say add 2-3 capfuls per gallon of finish to make it dry faster. And you can do that to walnut oil to make it dry faster as well. But I wouldn't. My walnut oil will dry over time, and it'll become part of the piece. And that's I'm not in any hurry for anything to go dry real quickly. It's not that important. I'll put a finish on a salad bowl today and put it in use in the kitchen tonight. It even though it hasn't dried, it will over time. Questions, anybody?
Yeah, we have one question right here.
What about tongue oil? Do you use any of that?
I don't. I do have some tongue oil around here in the shop, but if you held tongue oil side by side with linseed oil, they're very similar. They have the same amber coloring. They have the very similar chemistry as far as their acidity content. So a lot of these oils are acids. There's linoleic acid, oleic acid, all these things, acids, all these, like for instance, walnut oil is very high in linoleic acid, and olive oil is very low in linoleic acid. So linoleic acid is the stabilizing acid in natural oils, and the higher the linoleic acid, the more stable the oil is. And so, and we never even talked about mineral oil, which is a petroleum oil, and it does not dry at all. It evaporates. So we'll call those evaporative oils. And I think mineral oil is a perfectly good finish for items of utility, but the problem is you have to keep applying it to make it rejuvenate, because it just evaporates out of the wood. This could spur on many more questions about maybe adding. So I'm talking about tongue oil. Tongue oil is cost prohibitive in a sense. It is. It does have a little bit more elasticity than boiled linseed oil. And we use, we're talking about boiled linseed oil and linseed oil, which are two different things. I would always recommend to use boiled linseed oil if you want it to dry because linseed oil by itself is one of the slowest drying oils that you can find. It just takes forever to dry. So boiled means it's been superheated in an oxygen-free environment, and it basically is, its chemistry has changed. And then there'll also be additives like petroleum based distillates that go in with the linseed oil to make it less viscous and dry better. But tongue oil is cost prohibitive, and side by side, they're hard to tell the difference. I'm being kind of glib here because I don't see the need, because a manufacturer of tongue oil will say our tongue oil has so much better moisture barrier than other natural oils. And I can't for the life of me see why I need a moisture barrier per se for anything. Maybe so a wet cup doesn't make a ring on the table. I get it. But it's still going to break down. If you put your wet drinking cup on your tongue oil table and it condensates, it's going to break it down just a little slower than the boiled linseed oil would do. So something to think about. But thank you for the question. Any more on that?
One of the people online had a question. He was asking, are you using mineral oil or mineral spirits in your finishing mix? And Bruce, if he doesn't answer it so you understand it, why don't you unmute and explain what you're asking?
So if he wants to unmute, that's fine. I think I understand his question, but mineral spirits and mineral oil are not the same. Mineral oil is an oil. Mineral spirits is a petroleum-based distillate. It's a thinning material, and you would never want to put mineral oil in with the mixture that I talked to you about, because it will never dry. So mineral spirits and not mineral oil in that mixture. And I would say odorless mineral spirits if you can get them. Mineral spirits are all over the board, and think about what these thinners are. There's and I don't even know if some of them are even made anymore. Benzene, xylene, those sorts of things are mineral spirits. Did that answer the question?
Yes, he said that answered the question. I've got another one from the floor here.
Mike, do you sell unturned bowl blanks?
Yeah, that's the main thrust of my business. I am I'm out of stock for the larger pieces, but I have literally hundreds of blanks still that are under 12 inches. So maybe
Good, because my lathe is only 12 inches.
Oh, very good. I'm the guy you want to talk to. So you'll get my phone number off my website, or send me an email and I'll send you out some. And
There's another question from the floor here, Mike. Hold on.
Yeah.
I just had a question. I've had people ask me about finishes that are food safe. Are all these finishes food safe, or that you're talking about here? Like in your platter?
I'm going to say yes. I think the verdict's still out for some of the petroleum-based finishes, but science says that when these finishes are dried, they become inert. So yeah, we found out that lead was a basic component of many of these finishes, and obviously we've had to get rid of the lead for its toxicity towards humans. But thanks for the question, because I think of many boiled linseed oil or tongue oils or any varnish, Danish oils, lacquers, as being highly toxic, not to the end user, but to the craftsperson themselves. And that's what I worry about more than anything. A lot of these finishes are fairly toxic to touch or smell, very toxic to touch or smell, and probably are carcinogenic in many ways. So you want to limit your exposure to any of these. But once they're dry, they're inert. So they would be food safe. Again, you've got to ask yourself, what kind of food safe finish do you want for yourself? One that may break down over time, or one that the end user can rejuvenate? So always be asking those questions. Questions, anybody?
Sorry, I was standing next to the compressor as the relief valve lifted.
I heard it, yeah.
Sorry for that.
It's still fairly early and I didn't notice, I hope I'm keeping everybody relatively entertained here. Let's talk about a subject it's really broad and it's very subjective as well, but I'll give you my take on it. And luckily we're doing this fairly early in the day. I wouldn't have to wake you up if we did this later on in the evening. If you had a glass of wine in your hand or something. But I want to talk about tool design and grinding real quick. And this will be as short as we want to make it. Again, it's very subjective. I don't know why it's not coming up. Let's try it. There we go. Now it's coming. So I'm just going to run the video here. Fingernail, Irish, Ellsworth grinds. We're talking about gouges right now. These are all hybrids of each other. Gouges have not been around long in our history, 125, 30 years. This is my particular gouge design that I use. And I want you to maybe, if you're interested in this subject, hold your gouge up like I have it here and look at it and maybe notice some differences, what you have as compared to what I have. And then I'll explain why I think this isn't as subjective as many people would think. Because if you've ever watched me turn, most folk go, oh, wow, you make it look so easy. And part of that reason for ease is the way I design the tools. And let me explain. If you notice, the sides of my gouge here have a lot of metal on them. So this angle here is relative to the same angle on the front of the gouge. And jigs that a lot of people use to sharpen their tools usually super grind that side off. So there is no metal laid on the side because the jig just rolls the tool over and it doesn't swing the handle around, so you can leave metal on the side of the tool like here. And so what that does is, since the angles on the sides and the nose are relative equals, the tool feeds in at a continuous process, because you really, if you want to effectively cut the wood, you want the tool to be fed into the wood instead of you pushing it all the time. So, and we'll talk more about what that process is. And then notice how quick of an arc I have on the top of the tool. That conversation we had about the tool skipping and sliding and ripping across the rims of the bowl is because you didn't hit the point first. My points are fairly prominent on my gouges because I want to see where that makes contact with the spinning surface. We'll talk about poorly ground gouges coming up here real soon, but I'll show you what another type of gouge would look like that didn't look like my design here. So I'm going to show you the side of the gouge, and this is more subjective, but the angle here is very important. I'm going to say 45 degrees is a great spot to be. And then this angle here can be whatever you want it to be. There is nothing or no one that can tell you what that angle is, because it's determinate on what you want it to be. Do you want to shear scrape with it? Do you just want to cut with it? Do you want to scrape with it? The longer this angle becomes, the more effective this as a scraper it becomes. And the shorter it is, like a traditional gouge, it's not even ground down. Those tools are not as usable because of the lack of angle there. They only cut broad lines. And then I said 45 degrees. Let's draw that off. So the Americans and the Europeans measure their angles differently. So when I said 45 degrees, everybody can see that that's 45 degrees. But the Europeans measure from the interior of the flute, and the Americans measure from a datum that's a horizontal line in top of the tool. So if I said 30 degrees, there's some vagueness to that. We don't know where our angle is after that, because we don't know if we're measuring from the horizontal line on top or through the flute. So there was a movement many years ago with a group of woodturners, Alan Lacer, Stuart Batty, Alan Batty, myself, and we were trying to get the whole world to talk about where we're measuring from. In my mind, I've gone to the European thought and I measure from this angle here. So you can see that it's 45 it's a no-brainer. We know where that is, but typically just a hair sharper angle is just about good enough for most North American dense timbers. If you were working with cocobolo or a rosewood or maybe mesquite, that angle's a little bit acute. You might want to make it more obtuse. If you're working with pine, maybe something a little sharper. Okay, so the density of the wood is determinant on the angle there. If you understand where I'm coming from. Okay, let's move on. What else have I not mentioned here?
We do have a question here.
Yes.
You can pause.
Mike, would you do a different point if it was wet or dry wood that you were turning?
Yes, definitely the density of the timber, the dryness is a drier timber is always going to be, regardless of the species, it's going to be harder. But no, I keep the angles all the same on just about everything that I make. And that's because I'm fairly regular about the timbers I'm cutting. I don't use exotic woods. I use only the woods that grow around my property and in the neighborhood. So I'm working with walnuts, oaks, madrones, myrtle. These are all relative similar density timbers. But if I had to get an exotic to cut on, like Osage orange, or I'm trying to think of woods that are in your area, I would assume mesquite is certainly more dense than walnut. You might want to make that angle more obtuse. But there's a point where you need that angle to be at least 70 degrees. And I just drew a line that's probably 70 degrees to this surface here. And once it gets past that, the wood just pushes you away. You need a wedge there to cut into the wood or into any substrate, just like your pocket knife or anything like that. Did I finish up on that question? Let's go ahead. I'm just going to show you how I grind this. I'm going to move the cursor here. And this is the same gouge, but with a shorter bevel. Notice the bevel is shorter. And this is a traditional grind or a bottom feeder type tool. It has no angle there. It's ground straight across. And this generally is always the same angle as my fingernail gouges. Sorry, I lost track there. And this gouge is when I do highly figured wood or hard to cut wood that I want to lay down smoother, or the interior of the bottom of the bowl. That's when I use this particular gouge. And if you think about it, this is a spindle roughing gouge design, the same gouge you use for roughing down spindles. This is how I get the angle on my grinder. I put it on the platform and it'll read out the angle that the tool will have when I finish up. This is a share maybe 42 degrees, and that's a good angle for me for most of the wood that I cut. And then I keep that platform at that angle at all times, and all my tools get that angle. The smaller gouges, the fingernail gouges, the bottom feeders. So the reason is when you see me grind here, you'll see what I do. This is another way to test angles with an angle. Notice what I did there. I planted the tool. There's no handle here, so it makes it easier, but I planted the tool flat on the platform. So while I grind, I'm always in contact with that platform. I don't ever get the tool picked up or dropped. Therefore, the angle will change. Now, I would highly recommend that you do this way. And I know many of you folks don't have interest in it, and the jig is doing you just fine. I'm just going to say this is going to open your eyes to so many other options. Let's just, now you know this tool has a handle. Watch my gut is out of the way of the swing. So you've got to stand fairly far back because you're going to roll that tool on the platform. So, but again, I notice where my left hand here is on the ferrule, not on the handle. And that is because I don't want to pick the tool up or drop it. So I'm clamping it right onto the platform. I'm going to show you some close-ups here just to get the idea. A little bit more here. I'm going to stop right there. Notice I've got an angle here, which is relative the same angle as that's on the nose. How I did that was I touched underneath on the top of, or the bottom of the bevel. Then I'm going to roll it into the cutting edge. And when I see a hot red spark, I know I'm on the cutting edge. But I know most of you folks now are going to those diamond wheels. Those wheels don't cause sparks. So this puts you at a handicap because you don't know where the cutting edge is. I know where the cutting edge is by watch the hot red spark come down the flute. Boom. Now I've got a hot red spark. That tells me I'm on the cutting edge. Now I'm just going to hit that whole surface. There it is. And then drop the handle. Therefore, I don't have facets on my tool. It's one complete grind all the way across. Sorry, that's a blurry image there, but I hope you get the idea. Now, let's design a fingernail gouge in the day, not anymore, but if your tool came, it usually looked like this. I'm going to jam that right into the face of this coarse grit wheel and put a fingernail on it. Now I'll flip the tool over here. There you go. Let's take a look at that. Now you can see, this is I think Doug Thompson made this tool. It's kind of a modified V. I find these tools to be, this design to be relatively hard to shape and correctly. But we have this reflective surface. You can see the reflection there. And basically what we're going to do is remove the reflection and we'd have a sharp tool. So keep your eyes on it closely. So I'm going to remove the reflection. I've got the volume off so you're not hindered with that noise. It's pretty loud. So I keep rubbing that off until the reflection goes away, but I'm careful not to change the shape that the interior of that flute gave me already. There we go. Hot red spark coming down the flute. That tells me I'm on the cutting edge. Now this particular tool, it looks fairly clean and that reflection is now gone. There's no flatness to it. It's a sharp edge. Now I've determined that there's too much of a point on this tool, even though we talked about the point. I just kind of give the nose of that tool a softer nose. And you want that when you're push cutting. Now let's remove the length of the bevel. I make this bevel shorter, so this will become a better interior curve cutter. Any questions on that? Okay.
Any questions here? No, we're good, Mike.
Now, the shorter the bevel, the better the wood turner. Just remember that. Keep that. Common pour grinds. Let's look at them real quick, and we'll call this subject done. Why is that a pour grind? Well, two reasons that I can see, and I see this gouge everywhere I travel to. It's because it's been done on a jig. You've got too long of a nose, so it's too flat here. It's really hard to find out where the top of that gouge is with this design. And of course, there's no tool steel on the side. So you know that was done with a jig. It's super ground the sides. Well, whatever you determined was the nose of the gouge, 35, 45 degrees. The sides got ground about 20 degrees sharper because of the lack of ability for the jig to bring the handle side to side. That's why I would call that a poor common grind. The problem with this tool is it's hard to control because of the long surface here. It skates around while you work, and then it's not feeding correctly because the sides are super sharp. And of course, your tool's going to vibrate more and it's going to dull off faster because of that super sharpness on the side. Let's look at it, two more, maybe three. I don't remember how many I have here. What do we got? That's a very common tool to see. The nose of the tool basically has had too much attention with the grinder, so you ground away the front of the tool. You can argue you have 2 points now, but I wouldn't keep that on your tool if you were so inclined to fix it. And then maybe one more pour grind. Oh no, there's a couple more. This is a bird's beak. Basically, too much attention has been given to the sides, so now you have a tool that's kind of hook shaped, and this is something you don't want to duplicate. One more here. Let's take a look at another. And this is probably the most common pour design here. Everything looks fairly good about it, but it's missing a major component, and that's the angle of the bevel. It's too dull. It's too, I shouldn't say too dull, too obtuse. We're not talking about the edge. So this tool gets spit out. When you try to hit the wood, it just pushes you away because of that angle there. And you always want to make it more acute to pierce the substrate, and the substrate is wood. Let's draw a graft here to the left. If I drew a point like that, or I drew a point that's much sharper, the one on the right here is going to pierce the wood easier than the one on the left because of the lack of angle there. And so you get the concept. The front of your gouge and the sides of your gouge are the same concept. Now, let me blow your mind a little further. The acuteness of this tool here will make it dull off faster. And there's a lot of factors that will play into that. The type of tool steel you're using, and if you're cutting instead of scraping, and or the wood will determine how long that edge will last. So a lot of factors there. As a wood turner, as a bowl maker, I'm moving lots of wood through my gouges at one time because the diameter of the work is so large that there's a lot of wood going through the gouge. So it's abusing that cutting edge relatively quickly because of the amount of wood that's going through it. So I don't get my tools as sharp as many other people might because of the acuteness of the angle. I want my tool to be fairly jagged. I use a 46 grit wheel here in my shop to do most of my gouges work. Because it leaves more of a jagged edge and it lasts longer, and I don't have to sharpen as often as if I got it too sharp. So think about it. If I drew, let me clear that off, maybe a whiteboard here. If I drew, this is a graft. That horizontal line there represents razor sharpness, as sharp as you can get it. This represents sharp. This may represent fairly dull. When it hits the wood, let's draw the graft, this angle drops quickly when it's that sharp. This one kind of levels off and dives off. You see how this works. So maybe as a bowl maker, I don't get my tools as sharp because of the amount of wood that's going through my tools. And just to kind of think about that, if I did bottle stoppers or pens, we don't use bottle stoppers here. You should laugh. This diameter of that work is so small. Let me stop the share here. The diameter of that work is so small, and it's end grain product. So the wood is put between centers, a small diameter. You can get your gouges and your skews super sharp, and the wood doesn't diminish that edge nearly as much as a larger diameter object. So that's how I think about sharpness of tools. Sometimes they require different sharpnesses depending on the diameter of the work or the density of the work, of course. So something to think about. And I'm done talking about tool grinds and designs unless you guys want to add to it.
Any questions?
Anybody asleep there, Ken?
No, everybody's awake. There's a conversation going on. Joel, did you have a question?
I just couldn't remember the name of the jig that we use all the time around here. Wolverine.
Yeah, probably Wolverine Vari Grind. Yeah, that's what most people use around here.
Yeah, and I wouldn't know much about those. When I started turning, there was no such thing. So I had to sink or swim. And I think if you put about an hour or two into the thought process of doing it by hand, you could do it yourself. You know, you could have a physical ability too that would keep you from putting a nice edge. And so jigs are very important for that. I get it. But I think the variability of being able to lengthen a cutting edge or change the bevel quickly for whatever reason you had to do that, it's nice to know how to hand grind.
Mike, could you comment on one of your colleagues? Stuart Batty promotes 40-40 grind. Do you have any comment about that? Yeah,
So Stuart is probably the best wood turner I've ever met in my life, besides his father. And Europeans, and I'll include English people there, are all very traditionalist. As an American, my traditions aren't nearly as fundamental as their traditions. So just to put a funny thought about this, if I was sitting down with the Baddies and having dinner like I did when I went to Northern England often in the day, if Stuart was here on the my right hand side, and he said, "Pass the potatoes," and I'm right here, as an American, I would grab those potatoes and give them to him. But in their household, it had to go clockwise all the way around to him. And if you didn't do it that way, they'd look at you like you were daft, as they would say. And the same thing would be, no, and you think it's funny because we don't think that way generally. And I made Alan a cup of tea, and he noticed that I didn't twirl the spoon clockwise, and it disturbed him. And he brought it up to me that, boy, you're not stirring it properly. Well, you can see traditional thoughts like that also come into the tools. Stuart says 40-40. Well, Stuart's very good at what he does, and it works great for him. And I agree 40-40 is a great place to be, but there's so much more variability out there that we could put on our tools that really doesn't make a whole hill of beans about anything. So this is an interesting concept. Let's talk about, I'll draw, actually, you know what? Let's not draw. Let's draw on the gouge itself. I'll just come back to that video. I'll share my screen. And so the variability of the 40-40 grind, there's not a whole lot of variability. And when you see Stuart teach this, and keep in mind, Stuart's a teacher and not a maker. Okay, there's the side of the tool. So Stuart is saying 40 degrees here and 40 degrees here. That's a great place to start. 45, 45, whatever you want to do. I prefer a 40 degree. Let's just say I like that 40, 45, somewhere in that area. But I also like my angles to be cut way down sharper, because guess what? You saw me scraping that back of that platter. I am scraping a lot and I'm not cutting. And the reason I'm scraping a lot is because I actually have to make the stuff, and I have to make it quickly. So I don't push cut like Stuart does, because it would be not smart to do, because it would take you a lot more skill to do and a lot more time. So I elect to rip the wood off. We'll call it rip. It sounds bad, but it works perfectly good. But I think there's so much more variability. So if you're going to cut pine, you want a sharper angle here. You can make this whatever you want it to do. Just know that the sharper this gets down, the more variable it becomes. It makes it for a better scraper. Now, I know some of my colleagues, like Cindy Drozda, she doesn't even scrape with a gouge. If she has to scrape, she'll pull out a scraper. And I say that to me, I just as soon scrape with a gouge, because it's got a sharper edge on it than a scraper. So I come from that thought process, and that's where I go. So those traditional concepts, not that important to me, but I understand where they come from. Also, think about this. I'm Let me draw a graph. Let's see. How would I do this? So let's just say that that's 45 degrees. It's probably somewhere between 40 and 45, but let's just say I drew it at 45. If my tool's at 46 or 50, that tool is not going to cut as easily into the substrate as one that was cut at 44. Through the whole thing of what I just explained, that should open your eyes into thinking about this. When it's sharper, more acute, it pierces the wood and self-feeds. So at 40 and 40 up to 44, the tool self-feeds. At 45, at 46, now you're pushing the tool in because the wood doesn't accept that angle like it would a much sharper 44. Does that get on? That's really a very technical, physical thought of what's going on when you're cutting wood.
Thank you for that explanation. Any other questions? Yes, there's one.
So Mike, you were talking about the 40-40 grind, and what, in your description there, what is the grind that you prefer? The 40?
Yeah, I would probably be somewhere between 40 and 45 on my bevel, and probably more like 30 on the cutting edge. So much sharper than 40. Thank you. And going back to traditions, and whatever they are, and I've traveled extensively throughout Europe, and listening to what traditions are there as compared to what they are here. I'm trying to think of a thought. So if you wanted to be a wood turner in America, you need probably a pickup truck, a chainsaw, a lathe, and some tools. If you're a German and wanted to be a professional wood turner, that doesn't work. You have to go through an educational process. So that's tradition for you. In this particular case, I don't think we need to hold on to that tradition. I'd rather go the way we think about it. It's like, hey, have fun. If you want to get hit in the head with a bowl, that's your business. But in Europe, it just is a thought process. And I know Walt's in the room. He's been to those Utah symposiums. We used to go around the world looking for wood turners to come to the Utah symposium, which, by the way, was the first symposium, basically one that's all of them have been modeled after. We had a hard time recruiting a lot of foreign wood turners because they weren't willing to show us their concepts. And the reason is their traditions. They think if they gave away their techniques, that their competition would steal their business. Many of us in the wood turning business don't jive with that, because at least through my educational process, I've learned a lot more through sharing my simple concepts. Heck, I was in a class last week at Craft Supplies, and having 10 students in there, I learned things. I not only learned things from them, I learned things about what I'm actually saying. So sharing these techniques only makes us better. The type of prudishness that we would find around the world, say, because they didn't want to share their techniques, were actually more, it was kind of sad to think that way, because they probably could have learned a lot if they actually came to Utah and took and saw what we were doing at our symposium. It would have made them better turners. Matter of fact, Dale Nish sent me to Italy, and he said, when you're down there, meet so-and-so in Bellagio. And I went to this guy's gallery, introduced myself, and he wouldn't let me in his shop, but he showed me pictures of his tools. And Dale wanted me to give this guy a round trip ticket to Utah to teach. And he told me that he would never do it. And because he didn't want his competition to know what he was up to. His work was rudimentary, for one, and two, his tools were all files. We haven't turned like that in 60 years. So he certainly could have learned a lot by showing up, but his prudishness kept him from opening his mind. So I got on a diatribe. I don't even remember why we started that, but the traditional thoughts, there are no best ways. I think there are certainly good ways, but 40-40 is just a way, and it's a good teaching technique, but you got to know to vary it, because I see it all over the place, especially on YouTube. People talk like it's gospel. Well, none of it is gospel. It needs to be varied a bit.
Any other questions? Ray's got one here.
I've always thought when I was sharpening my gouges that I was supposed to put a concave surface on the edge, but it looks like all your edges are very flat. Is that correct?
No, Ray, thank you for bringing that up. What you don't see here is a hollow grind. This is concave, and that was, of course, done by the angle of the grinding wheel, the circular. Yeah, so thank you. They either need to be flat or concave. They look flat because this was done on such a large wheel that that arc isn't nearly. So if I used a 6-inch wheel, you'd see that arc readily. But you're right, because the tool has to impinge on that surface and the cutting edge together to create your straight lines.
I was actually referring to concave edge on the wings.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Ray. This edge should always be, it should always be flat. Mine are fairly flat, or if you looked on this angle, they're slightly convex.
I meant convex, I'm sorry.
Yes, you don't want them concave because, well, you could certainly do it. It's just not helping you much. So if you make it more convex, you can certainly shear scrape with them better, because that edge is way more prominent than a concave surface like that. That was one of the gouges that I showed you with the poor design, was a concaved edge. So thank you, Ray. That's excellent. Good point. I should have brought it up at the start.
By the way, Mike, I just want to comment that based on what you were discussing about traditions, I'm very happy to let you know that our club is very, very willing to share all of our techniques. It's one of the unique things about our club that we share.
Yeah, for sure. And I think most clubs are. And I think Dale Nish, when he brought us to Utah and brought in all those people who were willing to share, Dale realized that Americans didn't really know a lot about wood turning because we didn't really have a tradition. But when he went around the world and he figured out that Northern England was where the best tradespeople were, and those were Richard Raffin, Ray Key, Alan Batty, Bill Jones. And so because those people actually worked in the trade, and their concepts of turning were so excellent because they were making an hourly wage at the end of their gouge. So they always did it the easiest or best way. And Dale brought them over, and we learned it. I learned it. And that sharing concept, I couldn't remember. The first thing I ever copied on a lathe was a picture that I saw in an art book done by Vic Wood, who was from Australia. And I went to my first symposium in 1988, and there Vic was. And I met him at the airport. I saw him just on accident, and I was wondering if he was going to the symposium, which he was. And he treated me like a son. And I hung on him that whole weekend. And I was, like every symposium at Utah, I was so sad when it was over. But at least I made new friends. That's the best part. And those are going to be lifelong friends, of course.
Many of us here would like that symposium to revive itself.
Well, you folks in Arizona know how hard that is to do. The demographics of us are getting older. And if you went to the symposium, the Utah symposium or the AEW, you'll notice there are a lot of young folks in there. Most of those young folks are there, like you saw at Utah, through scholarships, so they didn't pay their way in. And the cost of the facilities, the insurance, all those things became just too great to keep them going. And those young people, of course, we want them to keep those traditions going. But it's very similar to the same traditions most of you folks all went through. You were introduced to the lathe in junior high, or your dad had one or whatever, but then you went on to make another career and then came back to it later. And I think that's pretty much the way it will always be. There are not going to be many folks like me. I think I've had many young apprentices over the years, but I think when they've saw the work that was involved, and not only that, there's the ability to actually sell your work is so difficult, to combine the hard work, the techniques, the education, and then the sales techniques and the business savvy. It's a hard slog for anybody, and I get it. But it's been a great career for me. Again, there are sacrifices that you have to make. Number one, I've never had children, never wanted children. I met a gal in college that didn't want children, and we held true to that fact. That means we didn't have to put children through school, although we did have 2 foster children that we help out fairly financially. But it was a good career for me, even financially, and that it was because of the work that I put into it. If you can imagine, in 1991, when I was in my first major year of production, I made 3,500 bowls. I had 2 employees, and I averaged about $75 a piece for those bowls. Do the math there. That was more money than many doctors and lawyers were making in 1991. And I was a wood turner, and I did that for well over 15 years at that same clip. And my wife and I always saved everything we ever made, because we didn't need fine cars or anything like that. And so we just rebuilt old homes and parlayed that into a beautiful ranch out here in Northern California. So more of the story.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other things we want to discuss? I'm trying to think, since you folks are in Arizona, I want to talk to you quickly about walnut. Is that okay? We got a few more minutes, Ken? No problem?
Yeah, we've got plenty of time.
Okay, very good. Let me share my screen here. I'm going to take this video off. Why isn't it going on? And let's, so in Colorado, or in Arizona, you have a walnut tree called Juglans Major. Any of you folks work with that wood before?
I'm not seeing any heads nodding out here.
So it's a very, so in California, we have Juglans Hinzii, which is Juglans Hines. So Juglans means walnut. So the scientific term, and I'm using the scientific terms not to bore you here, but just to show you the variability of the species. In California, we have Juglans Hinzii, also known as Claro Walnut. That's the common name. Somebody might even refer to it as black walnut, but it's Juglans Hinzii. In Arizona, you have Juglans Major, which means walnut, larger walnut. Even though it's not a larger walnut, I don't know who named it scientifically, but that's what they call it. Juglans, if you break that down in Latin, Juglans, Ju means Jupiter or God, and lands means nuts, or that's not a good word to say, acorns. So God's acorns, if you said God's nuts, that didn't sound right. So that's what the family of trees is Juglans. So if you get your hands on Arizona walnut, it's a beautiful timber. It's very closely related to our Claro walnut, and it's different than black walnut, which grows from, let's say, Nevada all the way to the East Coast. And I'm trying to find. It looks to me like I don't have that file, but I'm going to show you. I think there might be a file here that I'm not seeing. Let me see if it's here. I have a little presentation just to talk about walnuts in general, because I think it's interesting. So let's close that. So am I still sharing my screen with you?
Yes.
Just
We're still seeing it.
indulge me here. I'm going to, hopefully this queues up. The computer seems to be working very slow today. So I'm fortunate enough to live here in Northern California where the walnut tree, these are some images of some walnuts. This is where I buy my walnuts. I'll go back to the front page here. We have in California, we have this is the story here, a walnut story, my relationship with walnut wood. This tells you what juglans means. Anyway, these are the 4 major commercial walnut varieties: English walnut, black walnut, Claro walnut, and a cross-pollinated walnut called Paradox, which is the 4th one down here. A guy named Luther Burbank 100 years ago was a botanist, and he lived in Northern California. He was actually from the East, but he came here to work in the agriculture business. And he crossed the English walnut with the California walnut and created a subspecies, Paradox. So he bred the Juglans regia, which is English walnut, originally grew in the old world from, so basically Iran is basically where this tree comes from, but we call it English walnut. And it's, to me, it's the most superior of the walnuts, at least visually, but the Paradox is a close second. And stop me if this is important to you. These are your typical walnut leaves, are much broader than the black walnut there. Your Arizona walnut would have a very similar leaf to that. Give you some idea how these grow here in California. The orchard there on the left, you can see the trunk is different in appearance than the upper portion of the tree. And that's because they used the Claro or the California walnut as a rootstock, cut the tree off when it was about a year old, and then added the English to the top of the tree. And that is because the English walnut doesn't grow in California soils, but it produces a much nicer to eat nut. It doesn't taste as good as black walnut, but it's a much bigger nut and much more commercially viable. Now notice the spacing there is about 40 feet. So these were dry farmed. They weren't watered. So that's a beautiful agricultural concept. If you can grow a crop that doesn't have to be watered, that's important, especially nowadays. But we haven't heated that. And now on this one here on the right, notice that there's no different coloration between the trunk and the root, is because the trunk is Paradox. It's that cross-pollinated walnut, and it's a much more vigorous tree. It grows faster than the California walnut. You don't notice the difference in the trunk color, but notice how close these trees are now. These trees are all watered, and these trees will only live 25 years and then be ripped out and redone again. Whereas these trees here were at the picture you're seeing there, those are 80-year-old dry farm trees. They grow a lot slower. They don't produce as many nuts because they're not watered. They do on year-to-year basis, but give you an idea of how this happens and why this happens and why they do it. My trees here on my property, I dry farm because I want them to be a little more sustainable. Just a little close-up view. This is the Paradox walnut there, the silver base, as compared to where they cut this. These were probably grafted in a laboratory at UC Davis. And then the old way, the California walnut, this was probably grafted right here on site because the farmer grafted them himself, and he was probably 5.5, 6 feet tall. So he grafted them much higher on the tree because he didn't have to bend over as compared to here. So just, these are just interesting concepts that I appreciate because I live in this country. Next time you're in California, just notice all the agriculture that's going around here. That is a Paradox walnut. Look how big that tree is. Less than 100 years old. So you can see how vigorous of a grower. This is the tree that Luther Burbank man-made by breeding the English with the California walnut. That's my friend who owns his name's Walt, and he owns a 500-acre walnut farm, and he wanted me to see this tree, so he drove me out to see it. I still go see this tree as a pilgrimage. It's neat. Now, this is a guy on the left. There is a guy named Skylar Phelps. Look at the root ball of that California walnut tree. And then on the right-hand side image, those are English walnuts. Those are the trees that were cut above the surface. And the root ball is a veneer grade burl. And if you slice that, it's a beautiful, 7,000-pound burl. Now, the difference in wood, this is that paradox wood. This is a Claro walnut. This gives you an idea of the difference of the color and the look of the walnut. Claro, now look at the black walnut. Much darker, more coffee colored. Then let's go to I think this is paradox, more orange. And then the English walnut, which is going back a little darker, but it's striped a lot more. So this bowl that I showed you earlier, let's stop share real quick. There's an English walnut bowl, just fabulous grain. And then look at the California walnut. The grain isn't nearly as visual as the English. And I prefer the English, the scent of English walnut is much kinder on the nose. It's much more soft spice, whereas the California or the black walnut is really spicy and really affects you while you work with it. And then just to give you some more images of the wood itself. The one here on the left, English, paradox, the oranger color, black walnut, and then the Claro, which is not a good image of the color, but more similar related to the black walnut. And your Arizona walnut would be very similar to that as well. So let's see. This is a interesting historic fact. In 1869, the U.S. completed a transcontinental railroad. Early entrepreneurs who struck out in the gold fields actually cut down walnut trees right here where I live and put them on a rail car and shipped them to New England, where the furniture makers preferred California walnut over their black walnut, their Juglans nigra. So just an interesting thought about walnut wood, just to kind of end our day with. I don't know if anybody has any questions, but thanks for indulging me to talk about it. I plan to do stories like that on our redwood here, myrtle wood, and also just some other common wood varieties, just as a special interest.
Thank you, Mike. Any questions out here? I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, Mike, because we kind of skipped over it. You showed us using ammonia to bring out the grain and coloration of a wood. I appreciate that because I've read about that, but never seen the results. So thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, and some folks will say use the commercial grade ammonia. Don't do that because it's very, very strong. I just bought the $3 half a gallon at the grocery store, and that works just fine. And it'll go into that chamber for as long as you want it to go. So the ammonia is reacting with the what is it? The something acid in the oak.
Okay, my question on that was, how long did you keep that you put it in a trash can and covered it up?
Yep. And
how long do you keep that in there?
It's going to be your choice, but mine usually go almost 48 hours. So
okay. I was thinking of like weeks and months, but
no.
Okay.
You'll notice an hour. If you put it in for an hour and you had something to compare it with, you'll notice it starts to fume it. They call it fuming. So if you want to look up that concept with in the furniture business, fuming is referred to where they take ammonia to react. You can do this with a lot of woods, not just oaks. But I wouldn't on some of the darker ones. So if you want to enhance medullary ray or other grain patterns, the ammonia does that.
Okay, something like cottonwood?
I don't know how much acidity. Can somebody out there tell me what acid ammonia is reacting with? Oak is very high in a particular tannic acid. that really reacts well with fuming ammonia. And that's the tannic acid in oak is very high. And if you think about the chemistry of wood, and this is important to kind of understand those things, because you can take a piece of oak and stick it in a plastic bag before you turned it and let it sit in there for months and months, even years, and it doesn't degrade. But if you took a piece of maple and did that same thing, it gets completely destroyed because of the sugar content in that particular species or family of trees is more susceptible to molds than other species that are high in specific chemistries that don't allow for degradation by molds. And typically the amount of sugar that the tree grew with would determine that in a simple thought, the way to think about that.
Mike, when you're doing the ammonia treatment, how do you protect yourself from the hazards to your eyes, your respiratory system? Obviously, you can put gloves on to handle things, but what else do you use as personal protective equipment?
Yeah, I don't. This is use at your own risk sort of thing. You know, safety is a skill. And when I'm working with ammonia, I know not to take a big hit of it. That's for sure, or let it touch my eye. So I've got glasses on and I'm not breathing. I'll hold my breath and just get away from it relatively quick. And you can do this on your patio. I wouldn't do it in your indoor home, but certainly do it in a spot where you have a lot of ventilation for sure. So yeah, again, use at your own risk, just like everything else. You know, you don't turn your lathe on and let it go 0 to 1600 without revving it up. You know, these are all skillful acts.
Thank you. Are there any other questions?
Well, I'd like to see the crowd. Is there any way to see the crowd out there?
Yes, let me get the camera switched here for you. Oh, a comment for you while I get.
Yeah.
While he's getting the camera, Mike, when I first made tea in England, the guy gave me a hard time like he did with you because I put the milk in after. He goes, "Oh, you should always put the milk in before." And then you pour the tea in. It's just, but hey, Brit's driving the left, so you know we got to remember that too.
That's right. You've seen that in action, and it's funny to see it because we you know, I imagine we have some Americans that think like that, but that it's so interesting to see, you know, because I'll have conversations with Frenchmen or Germans. You know, Germans think that Americans don't make good beers, and French people think America doesn't have good food, or you don't know how to make wine, those sorts of things. I say, well, you got to come back and check because we're doing pretty good. Yeah, because you know, it's funny. I remember being in England one time and the bartender was telling me how old the tradition their beer was. And he poured me a pint of this bitters or whatever it was. And he says, we've been making it just like this for 600 years. And I tasted it and I go, yep, it tastes 600 years old. That's the only good thing I could tell him to get him back at it. But yeah, you know, and the neat thing about what Americans do and their lack of traditions is we can experiment so much more because, you know, and I'm a winemaker, so I understand this. But if you lived in France and you wanted to be a winemaker, no, that doesn't happen that way. As an American, I can be a winemaker just by having the space to do it. In Europe, that wouldn't happen. Kind of interesting. So yeah, I forgot what I was. It's good to see the crowd out there, and it's not old guys, not all old guys. There's
we've got some young guys,
a couple young
girls
ladies
back here.
Very good. Good to see that. We need them to keep our traditions going, and I recognize a bunch of faces in there. And thank you. Are you guys at Wabba? How do you say that? Wabba. So is this where Phil Brennan started this workshop?
Yes.
Many of you folks probably don't know Phil. Phil Brennan, who's passed away probably, oh boy, a dozen years by now, maybe 10 years. He started that program up many years ago. I think I was the first person to teach there, or at least first invited teacher. So interesting. And I can remember that workshop because it was a fabulous thing that happened to me there. There was a young woman that took the class, and she had a an implant. I don't even know what they call it now, but I met her on the second day she'd ever heard a sound because of this implant they put in her. So she was, can you imagine hearing for your first time? And she was in my class, and I'll never forget that. And I don't know if you folks ever remember that or know who I'm talking about, but ocular implant, maybe, is that what they call it? Anyway. But Phil Brennan is somebody to be remembered there. If Phil was a president of the AAW at one time and a huge promoter of wood turning, and I certainly miss him and his family, and I stayed with them when I was there. But
For what it's worth, when we had our sale last weekend, his wife and daughter showed up at the sale, and they've decided that after all these years, they're finally ready to get rid of some of his equipment and wood.
Wow.
Took them this long, but they came and introduced themselves to us. I was glad to meet them.
Fantastic. Whatever you folks can do to help them, that would be wonderful. They've given a lot to me and the wood turning community. So thank you. Well, hey folks, hope we can meet in person one of these days. And I'm going to be in, I think it's, what is it, Chattanooga in June at the AAW. And please come up and say hi and introduce yourself if we haven't met. And I can't wait for us to get back together.
Thank you very much, Mike. Let's give Mike a round of applause.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great Saturday. Is it Saturday? Yeah. So have a great Saturday, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mike.